Hi, I'm Tyler Dawn Rosenquist of theancientbridge.com and contextforkids.com, and I am going to deliver my favorite teaching of all time today. And it's called Don't Touch the Fruit on That Little Tree. And this is something that I believe very strongly in, and I believe that not paying attention to this very important Torah commandment has shortchanged so many people, so many ministries. It's one of the worst things that I think that we do to people is we don't pay attention to this commandment that doesn't seemingly have anything to do with people. But let's take a look here. I want to take you to first Leviticus 19. When you come into the land, starting in verse 23, when you come into the land and plant any kind of tree for food, then you shall regard its fruit as forbidden, or uncircumcised, it says. 3 years it shall be forbidden to you. It must not be eaten. And in the 4th year its fruit shall be holy, an offering of praise to God. But in the 5th year you may eat of its fruit, to increase its yield for you. I am the Lord your God. Okay, so, it seems pretty straightforward. You plant a tree, and there is a specific new year for trees, and I can't remember what month it is in, if it's in Heshbon, where they officially count, okay, trees 1 year old now, 2 year old now, 3 year old, and it has to do with, when the trees bud out and bear fruit and all that. But you plant a tree, and you wait for 3 years. You don't eat it, you fertilize the tree. You make sure it's doing well. You're pruning it. You're picking off all the fruit, because a tree expends a lot of its energy making fruit. And it's not the best fruit. It's baby tree fruit. But, in our impatience, we just want that fruit now. And if you're anything like me, I move a lot and I plant fruit trees, and then 3 years later I'm gone somewhere else, so I never actually get to eat the fruit of the tree. But, you do this, and then the 4th year, all the fruit belongs to God. In temple times, that would have been presented as an offering. And in the 5th year, it's actually suitable for human consumption. So that's in the 5th year. That's a lot of years have gone by before you can eat of this fruit tree you've planted. Now, what does this have to do with people? Well, I want to show you some other situations. Let's look at Daniel chapter 1. In Daniel chapter 1, we see that Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they trained in the Babylonian schools for 3 years. Okay? Chapter 5, it says, the king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate and the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to stand before the king. And although they refused to eat the king's portions because they had been sacrificed to idols, they were educated in the king's schools, which means they learned all the Babylonian wisdom, some of which was bad, some of which was good. Yeah, Daniel went to public school in Babylon. So did Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And amazingly, they were okay. But 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, the king tested them, and they were found to be wiser than any of his wise men. Let's look at Galatians. Galatians chapter 1. Starting in verse 14, and I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my own age. Among my people, so extremely zealous was I for the traditions of my fathers. But when he who had set me apart before I was born had called me by his grace, was pleased to reveal his son to me, that was the incident with being blinded on the road to Damascus, in order that I might preach him among the Gentiles, I did not immediately consult with anyone, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before me, but I went away into Arabia and I returned again to Damascus. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to visit Cephas, Peter, and I remained with him for 15 days. So another 3 years. Of course, we know that the apostles were with Yeshua, Jesus, 3 years. There is this theme throughout the scripture of a 3-year training period before someone is released into the ministry. I mean, even like Daniel already knew God's laws. The apostles already knew God's laws. Paul already knew God's laws. So they were already experienced believers. They'd been living a godly lifestyle before they ever went into their training. Then comes us. We come into the faith from nowhere, and, we want to hit the board running immediately. But is that wise, and is that reasonable? One of the things that happens in churches, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, and, it doesn't matter if it's, it doesn't matter what kind of church it is. New people are zealous, okay? Zealous, wanting to serve now, do everything now. And a lot of churches take advantage of that, okay? Because that's the way it's always been done. They'll plug you in somewhere. Do you know I was teaching Sunday school when I was only a believer 6 months? That was a colossally bad decision on the people in the church. I don't know why on earth, when I had come from being the type of person that I was 6 months later, they're handing me curriculum and having me teach Sunday school. I guess they just thought I was a glorified babysitter. But those kids I was teaching probably knew more about the Bible than I did at that point. So this was bad. But they said, well, this was an older church. None of the older people wanted to do it. I was the only person who was willing, and so they put me in charge. But that shouldn't have happened. Mature believers should be doing the works in the church. And the young believers, like the little fruit tree, should be getting fertilized, watered, pruned, taken care of, pampered, and having that zeal directed. Zeal isn't bad, but when we're put into positions of responsibility and ministry, when we don't know our right hand from our left, well, that's just ridiculous. You wouldn't do that in any other anything. You would go through a time of training first. But in the church, they gave us these guilt trips, okay? And I don't, I see it in church and out of church. We kind of got indoctrinated into that and having trouble breaking free of it. But there was once this evangelism course that I took, and I know that God led me to take the course, but the punchline was funny. I took the course, and at the end of it, is an evangelism course, and I am not an evangelist, okay? I mean, it was a bad fit. But at the end, you were supposed to go and witness and evangelize complete strangers. So I did it, and it was bad. It was really, really bad. Now, at that point, I'd been a believer, oh gosh, a couple of years. Yeah, that was when I was a Southern Baptist. And I started, and it was like, what's going on here? And God said, well, I only told you to take the course. I didn't tell you to go and evangelize people. He wanted me to see what manipulation looked like, and to see the things that people will do, even if they're not suitable for it, if you will manipulate them. And the whole tagline of this course was, if the people you love die tomorrow and you haven't preached to them, then you're responsible for them burning in hell. If they were in a burning building, you'd go in and get them, right? And if you didn't, you'd be a murderer. Something like that. Well, I mean, that took... I've always been the kind of person who wanted to be pleasing to God. And it's good in some ways. In some ways, it makes me hyper-obedient once I know He's telling me to do something. But in other ways, it made me very, very easily manipulated. And that's the way new believers are. If you tell new believers that they've got to get to work right away, Well, they're going to get to work right away. However, I also believe, and I haven't had a chance to try this out on anybody, if you tell new believers that they are precious and their future is precious and they are worth making an investment in, if we say, you know what, you just need to sit here and grow as a person, work on your character, work on your Bible knowledge, learn how to study, learn how to pray, learn how to do all these basic foundational things, learn how to live as a believer, because you're worth it. And we see potential in you, and we want you prepared for whatever God has for you. Whether it's being a missionary or being a teacher or caring for people, feeding the poor, or just giving. You've got to give wisely. We're supposed to take those 3 years. We're supposed to take those 3 years and get prepared. Putting all that zeal in here. All that zeal focused towards becoming a better person. But we don't do that. People want to serve now. I don't know if people want to serve now because they were trained in that the moment they got in, or if somehow they would, it's been so long I can't remember. They would be offended at the thought that they actually need work done on themselves. Of course, the older we get in the Lord, we know the more work we need done. It's, pretty crazy. So, we see the pattern. We see it with the tree. Oh, okay, so the first 3 years, the tree, the fruit's not good. I mean, it looks good, right? It feels good to us when we're new because we remember what we used to be like. I used to swear like a sailor, and I used to do a lot worse than that. And I was a horribly wretched person. As I always say, if you knew me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you knew me yesterday with the stuff that I'm still clueless on. But then in that 4th year, the fruit is set apart to God. And I found my first, and the thing is, it's not only when we come to the Lord in the first place, it's also when we come to a knowledge of Torah. When you come into the knowledge that God's laws are forever, and God's laws are the rules of His family, and they're not burdensome, and, they're the constitution of His kingdom. The laws of His kingdom, just like, any place has laws that teach you how to be loving towards one another and to not trespass on each other. That 4th year is a special year of communion between yourself and God when you've spent those 3 years of preparation. And then in the 5th year, then your fruit is good to be shared. I was, as I came to the Lord in 1999, January 1999, so we're looking at this is my 18th year now, walking with God. 5.5, 6.5 years, I don't know. Five and a half or 6.5 years ago, I came into a knowledge of Torah. My eyes were opened. Hadn't been able to see it before. It wasn't because I didn't want to see it. It was because I was partially blinded. It's got to remove the value judgment from that. You're blind until you're not blind anymore. And I was blind, and I'm still blind to a lot of things, but I digress. So in that 4th year, the way it went with me is my first 2 years, I was nasty little snot, beating people over the head with Torah and about things that I hadn't actually studied myself that I was sure were true because they were against Christianity. And I was against Christianity because Christianity was wrong about everything. Yeah, that's what I believed. Okay. But I was angry, okay? I was not only angry, but I was feeling very elite. or as the gamer world we'd say leet. I was feeling leet. That I knew something that other people didn't. This is a trap that I personally have fallen into over and over and over again in my walk. And hopefully I'm over that. That I would come into some knowledge and I would decide, oh my goodness, it doesn't get any better than this. I am now in the remnant. I am a remnant. I know this. I am hot stuff. Yeah, I got here myself, and this is all about me. So, for the first 2 years, it was like that. The third year, there was a marked change. And it didn't help that I was with teachers who were feeding that idea too. But in the third year, I noticed things started to change, and God really started challenging me on my personality. It's like, oh, did you figure this out? Oh, I thought I had removed your blindness, but I didn't realize it was you who did everything. It's like, oh, and God started showing me that Christians weren't wrong about everything. Jews weren't wrong about everything. And that Hebrew roots Messianics weren't right about everything. That, we're all just messed up. And we're just in this ever continuing state of being messed up, and we don't know what we're messed up in, but we'll figure it out, and we keep going. So the third year, that started changing. And God really started softening my heart towards Christians and Jews, and towards really everyone. And I started to come down off my high horse and realize that I wasn't all that in a bag of chips. Now, in the fourth year was really interesting. The fourth year was strange. I wrote the bridge, but I also started getting glimpses of what I was supposed to do, which is a calling that I would have never thought in a million years. And it was the calling into children's ministry, and I didn't want that. No, there's no glory in teaching children. There's no money in teaching children. There's no prestige. It offended my ego that I was going to be teaching kids instead of adults. And yet, it was just making sense. And I started writing books for kids. And everything kind of started to gel. But still, I didn't want to give up the adult stuff, because the adult stuff is where the prestige is. You want to teach ancient Near Eastern first century context to adults so they can go, oh, Tyler, you are just so amazing. I can't believe how much you know. You are so anointed. Well, the kids don't do that. You go and speak to kids, and the kids just, they kind of just sit there. And, but then, they're either enjoying themselves or they're not. But they're not, you're not impressing adults. Impressing adults is where it's at, right? In the fifth year was when I was really fully released into children's ministry and into what I was doing. And it was just the most amazing thing. And I had always preached the fruit tree thing because I knew there had to be something there. And I saw the 3-year pattern with all of these other guys, and it couldn't be a coincidence. But I'll tell you something. I wonder if the people who got a hold of me when I was brand new to believing in Jesus 18 years ago, if they had invested in me, if they had directed my zeal and my eagerness to serve into becoming a better person, because I was a hot mess and my character was not good at all. I wonder how my Christian walk would have been different. Would have been a lot better. Would have been a lot better on everybody. And then when I came into Torah, if people had done that, or if I'd had guidance, if I'd had people saying, hold your horses. You don't go charging out into ministry. You don't go preaching stuff that you don't even know yet. You're regurgitating. You haven't studied this stuff. You're going to be sorry later. And yeah, I was sorry. I was sorry when I became a Christian and I preached stuff that I was just regurgitating. I couldn't answer any questions about it. because I wasn't mature. The fruit was uncircumcised. Fruit was forbidden. It wasn't good fruit. I mean, yeah, I could throw it at people, like, one of the trees in the Wizard of Oz when they throw the apples, chucking them at Dorothy and everybody. I could throw fruit. I could hurt them with it. I could offend them with it. But the moment I was challenged on anything, I had no depth. And it wasn't like I had no depth as a believer, because I'd already been through a lot with God, and I wasn't going anywhere. But I had no depth in the stuff that I was preaching because other people had told it to me, and I was simply regurgitating. And I got to the point where I started asking my teachers, especially one, well, such and such. And they didn't have answers either. You see, they didn't have any depth to the knowledge. It's because nobody spent those 3 years with them either. And I come across this over and over and over and over again. How we're so shortchanged and how unloving and incredibly callous a thing it is to do, not only to new believers, but also to ourselves. To look at ourselves as mules, because, let's be honest. When you walk into a congregation, the first thing they do is put you to work, regardless of how long you have been walking with the Lord. You've just become a glorified pack animal doing the work nobody else wants to do. They know you'll do it because they know you're desperate to serve, and you want to have your eternal rewards. It's a short-term gain for them, but it's at a loss to the new believer. And if I had a chance to just sit down with every new believer, I wouldn't have any time for anything else. But, I would tell and I say, you're worth it. You're worth the investment. And it doesn't matter what your calling is. You may not think your calling may be doing yard work for your elderly shut-in neighbors. That may be your calling. They may bless God every time they see you. That may be how God just shows them He loves them in a world that doesn't even care anymore. But you do that yard work with good character instead of bad character where you're saying, I'm doing this, because you can do good works with a bad attitude and make them bad. Because if it's just breeding resentment in you, that's bad fruit. That's bad fruit. But if you're doing what you're doing out of love, that's something that has to be trained into you. Even Nebuchadnezzar recognized that you train someone for 3 years before putting them into service. So Nebuchadnezzar had Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego trained for 3 years in the Babylonian schools. When they came out, they were wiser than any of their own people. Why? Was it because they went to Babylonian public school? No. It was because they were believers in the Babylonian public school. It was probably private school, but that's okay. It's funnier when I say Babylonian public school. They were believers in that school, and so God blessed them. And the time was taken to give them the knowledge they would need to serve in the Babylonian court. So that's Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then we have Paul. Now, Paul was an expert in the law, and if you know what to look for in the book of Acts, you can see he was actually an officer of the Sanhedrin. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been there when Stephen was being stoned. He wouldn't have been guarding the coats. There are a whole bunch of little clues in there that show you what Paul did for a living before he went off chasing Christians. But Paul, what happened? Paul no sooner gets a knowledge of Yeshua, then he immediately starts preaching, and what happens? It almost gets him killed. He wasn't ready. So what did he do? He went off. He went off for 3 years. Someone who's an expert in the Bible. Someone who undoubtedly could recite the Torah. by the time he was 13. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel. So he probably, he was the grandson of Hillel the Great. So he undoubtedly, could also quote, recite large portions of the prophets and the other writings. But still, he needed 3 years. He needed 3 years to train with this knowledge of Yeshua because it changed everything. Now, if Paul, who is an expert in the law, needed 3 years of training and working on himself, because he talks about the flaws in his character, that he was a murderer in his heart, and just all the different things. If he was an expert in the law and he needed to get away with Jesus, Yeshua, for 3 years, then what about us who are Christians? And then we come into a knowledge of Torah. We need to get away. We need that 3-year investment all over again. And I know it's offensive to start over at the bottom, but we're not really starting at the bottom. We're just plateauing. You climb so far and then, Torah. And there's 3 years Torah. And then, you can go a little higher. But that's how he works with us. And looking at it as being offended that, I've been a believer for, 14 years or 15 years or 10 years or 5 years or whatever, and I had all this knowledge and I was, able to answer all the questions at Bible study and blah, 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 and now I know nothing. We have a choice. We can either accept that we know very little, not nothing, because it's not like we knew nothing before we came to Torah, but we know less than we thought we did. And the time has come for another season of preparation. And if we spend those 3 years, if we don't touch the fruit on our little tree, except to throw it on the ground and nod at other people, then what God's going to have prepared for us at the end will be better than we possibly imagined. But it takes a lot of work. It takes diligent work. 3 years. Then a 4th year just figuring out, just with God. It's important. We weren't created to be workhorses. We're human beings. We're the children of the Most High. The children of the Most High deserve a lot better than what they're getting. Being taken the first day into the faith and thrown into the job market without any job training. That's what they've done. That's what we've done to people. That's what we've done to ourselves. So, anyway, that is Small Bites of Fruit this week. And don't touch the fruit on that little tree. And, if you've done that to yourself, you can back away. And it'll be okay. You can take that time. We all need it. So, have a great week. Bye.